So cooking gave us a lot. It gave us our brains. Arguably, it made us who we are, and is now kind of baked into our biology. I mean, we need to cook. We need to cook food, and but it did something else for us too, because it gave us the meal. Before you cook, there really are no meals. There's no need for meals. You eat food when you want to, when you find it. You graze, essentially. But as soon as you cook, you need cooperation. Because someone's got to maintain the fire, and someone's got to prepare the food. And then you have this group of very hungry animals delaying gratification till the cooking is done. And then they need some rules so the biggest, strongest, greediest men don't run away with the food. So you get the rise of social regulation comes up around cooking. So it gives us a lot. I mean, arguably that's the beginning of civilization.
And you explore this through barbecue. Men, largely men. And slowly cooked meat. Just very briefly, the story of barbecue. I asked this because of the guy who had a smoker in the backyard. I love smoking pork. And how it actually started is fascinating.
Now, there's a couple stories about
It's in China.
Yes, okay. The dissertation on roast pig, Charles Lamb. Well, this is a story written in the 18th century. And the story goes like this. There was a legend that a swineherd named Bo T and his son Ho T are responsible. And Ho T is a kind of shiftless boy who one day while his father's out gathering mast for their pigs, they kept pigs. They lived in this house with them, as was often the case back then. Started a fire by accident, and the house burned down and it killed the pigs. And Hoti goes into the house to try to rescue the piglets, the litter of piglets, and he sees that they're all burnt beyond recognition, and he reaches down to touch one to see if it's alive, and a little bit of crackling gets on his and he touches it to his lips, and he goes, whoa. If you've ever had crackling, it is a life-altering experience. If you haven't, think bacon, and you're only about 10% of the way there. His father comes home, Boti comes home, he's furious. His son has burned down the house and killed the pig. But he says, no, Dad, come on in, and he gives him a bite of his crackling. And the father has the same reaction. This is incredible. So they build another house, and they get another litter of piglets, and they burn it down. And the practice spreads. And all over China, as Lamb says, the art of architecture was in serious danger. Everybody was like burning houses down to dress pigs. And finally, some wise head figures out you could actually have a fire and a spit, and there was a way to cook pigs without burning down houses, which was another important game. Now, I don't know that this is true. This may be a great story. It is a great story.
Aside from learning how to make life-altering crackling, what was the biggest thing that you took away from it? Because it seems that connects with the next part of the book, which is water, which is about time. Mm-hmm. And the fact that things take time. How difficult was it for you to learn that?
So difficult. I'm an impatient person. I really am, and especially in my dealings with the material world. And for me, as I said earlier, I did cook, but I was one of these people who would chop the onions really roughly and be chunky and uneven, and then start the saute. And I would give it 10 minutes to sweat, and throw in the canned tomatoes, whatever the next step was. I just couldn't let it be because I was in a rush. And I think a lot of us are in this boat with food and with cooking. Now that none of us has to cook anymore, there is an option, an inexpensive option. Even if you're poor, you don't have to cook. So when you are cooking, you're divided. You could be doing something else. You could be checking your email or getting exercise, or there's a million claims on our time. And with the result that it's hard to be in the kitchen. At least I found it. And so I studied with this woman, this chef named Samin Nosrat. She's Iranian-American. She had been my student, actually. And she became a chef, and she trained in Japanese. And when I wanted to learn how to cook, I asked her if she would teach me and give me lessons. And so she started coming to the house, once every couple of weeks, and we would do a 4-hour cook. And then we'd have a dinner and invite people over. And she told me at one observing my chopping. And she was like, no, you're not done. You're not done. They should be tiny, tiny specks. She showed me how to do it. And chopping onions is tough. I mean, for me, it kind of is the symbol of the drudgery and the difficult. I mean, here is this vegetable that, fights back when we try to chop it. And so it's a trial. And she said, the key to great cooking is patience, practice, and presence. And she had learned those words from her yoga master. She's a serious, student of yoga. And she's right. And learning to be patient in the kitchen and to be present to what you're doing, not multitasking, because we're all trying to do two things at once now, or three things at once, was for me the most important lesson. And it really was a life lesson, not just a cooking lesson.
But it almost becomes spiritual. I mean, you slow yourself down and you come to presence. You're there in the moment when the onion is cooking for 40 minutes.
Yeah, and it's so much better when you give the onion that much time. It loses its bite, it gets sweet, it gets caramelized. All these chemical transformations happen that you can't rush. And she described working in a restaurant, and she had 10 sous chefs working under her. And they were men, and they all loved having the flames like on the shows, on TV shows. She'd go down the line, turning down the flames. They were just rushing, and it was going to ruin it. And so learning that, and the koan that I started telling myself was, when chopping onions, just chop onions. And that was really hard to learn. But when I learned it, and I'm not to say I reached this state of enlightenment on a regular basis. But when I do, I really begin to enjoy being in the kitchen. And at this point, for me, and I'm going to sound a little nostalgic because I've been on the road for a long time, but that hour in the kitchen at the end of the day, or 45 minutes, or 2 hours, whatever it is, has become such a therapeutic time for me, because it's when I disconnect from screens and media, which we spend our days in front of. It's when I reconnect with my senses, because the great thing about cooking is you use all your senses. It's a very sensual process. And our senses are pretty underemployed these days, what kind of work we do. And it's when I reconnect with my wife and my son when he's around. And it's just that great shift. And
so when did we start to look at that time that we spent as a luxury and lose that attraction and lose that ability to make that?
Well, I don't know that people felt that way about cooking in the past when it was obligatory. I think you just did it, and maybe you complained and maybe you didn't. But to savor it is something new historically, I would guess. Because again, it's optional. You have to find your own reason to do it, since you don't have to do it. And there are many different reasons you could find, and I offer many of them in the book. I mean, one is health. I mean, it'll solve all your dietary problems if you're willing to cook. You don't have to worry about calories anymore, unless you're Paula Dean, say. There's always the exception to the rule. But when did we lose cooking in our lives? I think it really was a gradual process. It accelerated dramatically in the 60s and 70s when women entered the workforce. And this often gets depicted as, feminism killed home cooking. And I think the story is more complicated than that. I think what happened was that the food industry had been trying to worm its way into our kitchens and our dining rooms for a very long time. I mean, getting proper, it goes back to the beginning of the last century. Because the way you make money in food is processing as much as possible. It's very hard to make money selling simple whole foods. Ask any farmer, they'll tell you. But if you can add value, if you can add convenience, if you can add gimmicks, you make a lot of money. And so, but it was resisted. This kind of processed food was resisted for a very long time. And marketers who were trying to get into the kitchen would ask women, about their attitudes about housework. And they would always say, I want help on the cleaning, but the cooking I like. Cooking was creative, and it was satisfying. It has so much built in. It's the generosity of feeding your family. And I'm sure there were women for whom wasn't a pleasurable thing. But many women, most at the time, said, no, leave that alone. They kept going at it. They kept, especially after World War II, they invented all these processed foods for the war effort. Powdered orange juice, cane, freeze-dried coffee, all this kind of simulated meals of all kinds. And they really wanted to sell these to us. And they kept banging on the door, and finally, when women entered the workforce and the feminist revolution came, there was an opening. And that opening was the desire on the part of women to renegotiate the division of labor in the home. And that was a really uncomfortable conversation for lots of us. And before it could really get resolved, the food industry stepped in and said, don't argue anymore. We'll do it for you. We'll cook. And this moment is, for me, symbolized in this ad campaign that Kentucky Fried Chicken took out on billboards all across the United States. I don't know if they did them up here. It was a bucket of fried chicken, and with a two-word, underneath a two-word slogan, women's liberation. It was amazing. It was breathtakingly cynical. And they basically, but with that, they redefined not cooking as a very progressive thing to do. And that idea held. And women grabbed at it, and men grabbed at it, because it let them off the hook. They were very happy not to have to renegotiate the division of labor in the house. And that, I think, is when we succumb to the temptations of fast food and processed food. And it became socially acceptable to feed your kids regularly at McDonald's.